Okay, we're live. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Got another Cirucci team brief here today, November 5th, 2019. Got Johnny and George with me. Should be another great stream. We're just going to go right into what we were talking about before we went live, and the power of the rosary. Throughout history, on numerous occasions, the power of the rosary seems to have allowed the Jesuits to completely defy all laws of physics and logic. And the first example is the most powerful example is during the Hiroshima-Nagasaki nuclear bomb explosion, the supposed nuclear bomb explosions, where a group of a Jesuit novitiate only 4 miles away from the blast in Nagasaki was not destroyed, defying all laws of physics and logic. It's impossible, but in that case, the Jesuit there's been numerous. Actually, I'll link. I found a propaganda booklet written by the Blue Army in 1953 by one of the Jesuits who was there on the ground, and this whole booklet was about saying how the power of the Rosary miraculously saved these Jesuits. So you can see, what it ultimately is the Jesuit propagandists, using the Rosary to infuse religious superstition and to give more credence that the Catholic Church, has some special spiritual powers, when reality it's all just fraud. Another example of that is Jesuit Fidel Castro. People aren't aware of Fidel Castro, the longtime strongman communist dictator of Cuba, was educated at 3 Jesuit schools and educated by the Catholic Christian Brothers. But Fidel Castro somehow miraculously survived 600 CIA assassination attempts, but he was carrying a rosary with him the entire time. So you can see how that works there. And if you know that when the CIA supposedly tried to take out Castro in the Bay of Pigs in 1960, the guy who led the CIA mission, Manuel Artime, was a Jesuit-trained psychiatrist. So Jesuit-trained just like Castro. And, it's pretty easy knowing that to figure out why the Bay of Pigs invasion was a fiasco. But there's numerous examples, and Johnny, you brought up the Chicago fire example in 1872. There was a great fire in Chicago, and somehow the Jesuit church there didn't get hit by the fire, but the whole surrounding area got leveled.
According to Vatipedia, it was October 8th, 1871, and lasted 3 days to October 10th. And it was just a day shy, George, of October 7th, which is the Battle of Lepanto, which was also the day that secular Protestant America initiated its illegal war in Afghanistan.
Yes. So something you had to account for is variations. Right now is November the 5th here in North America. However, in much of the world, there's already November the 6th. So sometimes you had to account for that, differences in time zones. Just to, throw that out. And by the way, happy Guy Fawkes Day.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Remember the 5th of November.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everyone should know the historical significance of
how many people, guys? How many people have any idea that when they go and fight against the machine, they put on a Guy Fawkes mask, which represents the machine?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The point being, Guy Fawkes was a Spanish Catholic terrorist. Literally, it's even on his Wikipedia page. And Theodore Geisinger, in his book, The History of the Jesuits, Guy Fawkes is brought up quite a bit in the chapter on the gunpowder plot. But this guy was literally a Spanish Catholic terrorist, who fought for more papal temporal dominion. And and to your point, Johnny, it's a mockery that they're getting people to put on this Catholic terrorist mask, thinking that they're rebelling against the system.
Meanwhile, you're representing the system.
So, and Johnny, please don't take this personally. Fox's dad was Irish, but his mom was Italian, and so he went by Guido.
Yeah, well, no, that's okay. I enjoy rebelling against my ethnicity and my past. And real quick, we should give a summary of what it is we're talking about. November 5th, 1605, the gunpowder plot was an attempt after the Reformation. Several nations really not several. I would say the Netherlands, England, really not too much more than that, embraced out of Catholic Europe, embraced the Luther's protest. And when England, and what pushed England in that direction was Henry's desire to continue to rule on with his own offspring, Henry VIII, and was not allowed to divorce his very Catholic wife, Catherine of Aragon. He had to ask permission from the Pope. And I'm pretty sure that Pope was a Medici. I've got it on my, let's see here. I'll look it up real quick. But anyway, so this is the reason why England lurched away from the Catholic Church after Luther's protest. And England was huge, a huge loss for Rome. And Rome continued to put a lot of effort, and really didn't take very long to get her back, to control England. And supposedly the gunpowder plot was part of this. At the time, James I of England, aka James VI of Scotland, was ruling. James, a nominal Protestant at best. His mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, was devout Roman Catholic, and his offspring, Charles I, was secret Roman Catholic, caused the English Civil War. Nominal Catholic himself. And even so, if you read Tupper Saucy's Rulers of Evil, you get the impression that the gunpowder plot was a scam. And the scam,
Would you like to
really,
play next?
the question is, who outed the plot? The plot was to load the basement of the House of Lords with gunpowder and then blow it up. And meanwhile, in 1605, right? 1605? 07, 05. The Jesuits have the ability, pinpoint accuracy with poisons. Pinpoint accuracy with poisons. It is said that, let's see here. Let me get the full. It is said that, let me get her name. It's
I'm saying the Jesuits got Clement XIV pretty quick with poison. Like his contemporaries said that his face was like blue, like when he was like died, and that he was like in like agony pain. And like Clement XIV actually, like, just according to Greisinger, like he quoted Clement XIV saying, "I didn't think the Jesuits would get me this quick."
Both the 13th and the 14th. Clement number 13 was about to sign the dissolution of the Jesuits, and he died. And then the 14th signed, and then he died. And supposedly wasted away while he was still alive. Jeanne d'Albret was a Protestant queen of Navarre in France. And it is said that Catherine de' Medici, who was Queen of France, the Florentine Italian Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, was able to have her murdered by poisoning her glove. That's how pinpoint accurate it is. And yet we're supposed to believe that they needed to blow up the entire House of Lords just to get James I. So it's a believable idea that they never intended for that to happen, that they purposefully outed and they used Guido Fawkes as a fall guy. He was not a Jesuit. He was not an ordained Jesuit. He's basically a lay Jesuit. He's a hyper devout Roman Catholic, a lay Jesuit, and left him there to guard the door, and he was their fall guy.
Well, I think this was just like maybe a ruse where the Jesuits on the surface, because there was, I think it was like Father Henry Garnet was like sent to jail, and caught, and one of the Jesuits I think was even executed by the court. So this would give the perfect illusion, like the Sun Tzu plot, that the Jesuits, are no longer involved with English politics. But at the same time that this is going on, you had the Jesuit priest Toby Matthew, SJ, at the court of James I. while all of this.
Oh, great point. Great point. Tobias the father or Toby the son?
The son, Toby. The father
Toby was given a knighthood. Toby the Jesuit was given a knighthood because he did all he could to arrange a Catholic marriage for Charles I. So that tells you how good a Protestant James was. Gave Jesuit Toby Matthew, who was the alter ego of Francis Bacon, who you could actually say edited the divinely inspired King James Bible, as well as was William Shakespeare. You can make an excellent case for both.
No, absolutely, because there's even some great YouTube documentaries on the Sir Francis Bacon connection to Shakespeare. But if you know the Toby Matthew S.J. connection to Bacon, and like I've shown the drawing a few times, like on the stream I did with Clint and on one of our Cirucci team briefs. A drawing. Bacon was also on a pseudonym, this Protestant minister Sir Valentine Johann Andre, who is a Rosicrucian quote unquote Protestant minister, who wrote on the cover page of his book Mythological Christianae in 1619. He had a Jesuit IHS logo right on the cover, and this is Bacon in reality drawing this. And I think there's actually a quote from Tupper Saucy's book where he alludes to that Shakespeare was penned by Jesuits. Like there was Jesuitical influence in Shakespeare. It's an important. A lot of people don't know that history, but I just think it's just a really interesting angle. That all this was what was going on with Toby Matthew SJ at the court of King James that we're just talking about was kind of happening simultaneously to the gunpowder plot, which which is just interesting.
Yeah,
I think that gives credence to it was a Sun Tzuian Jesuit plot to give the illusion that the Jesuits were now banished from English politics because you had Father Cotton and Garnet were persecuted by the Queen.
They did. They made great strides in power in England after the sympathy came out as a result of the plot. And I think Saucy mentions that. George.
Well, actually, what's it called? Sir Edward Petre, this guy was an English, and especially with King James II, there's actually sources that he was an actual Jesuit, the second King James. Like Lord Robert Montagu, a British statesman, and I'll link the book. In his book, Recent Events and a Clue to Their Solution in 1885, Lord Robert Montagu literally says that King James II was a member of the Society of Jesus. And there was an actual Jesuit here. I'll link his wiki, Sir Edward Petre. And this is only probably 40 years after the gunpowder plot here, or in the same century. This is we see Sir Edward Petre was an English Jesuit who became a close advisor of King James II and was appointed a privy councillor. So this guy was the English privy councillor in the quote unquote secular government of England while being a Jesuit priest. And you'd think that after the Jesuits were involved in this, the highest treason of the land, that within the same century you wouldn't have fully ordained Jesuit priests in powerful positions in the English government.
Yeah, James II was forced to spend time in France and converted at that time. And there was no doubt that he was Roman Catholic when he came back, hyper devout Roman Catholic, as a matter of fact, and pushed so hard that he pissed off all of England and he was forced out of office. He's forced off of the throne. George, you trying to jump in?
Okay, so anyhow, you're talking a few minutes ago about the similar those were. In that there are obvious differences. The Bay of Pigs was, I guess, carried out April 1961. It was comprised mostly of ex-Cuban nationals who wanted to go back to Cuba and overthrow Castro's regime. Even though the Jesuits through the CIA had no intention of allowing them to succeed, they were set up to fail from the very beginning. Now, I realize the gunpowder plot was different. It was set up to fail from the beginning to help garner sympathy or empathy for Catholics in England. So in order to have it fail, you needed some pawns who had to be sacrificed. One of whom was Guy or Guido Fawkes.
Yeah, George, I like it. And anybody that knows anything about the Kennedy assassination rightly so, blames the CIA. And so if the CIA is the entity that committed a coup and slaughtered a sitting president in broad daylight in Dallas, how are they able to do that and yet attempt to kill Fidel over 600 times? What's the difference? The difference is Fidel was the communist, the triple Jesuit dipped communist that Rome wanted in Cuba. And Kennedy was the Jesuit mentored leftist Democrat that had outlived his usefulness in the Father Andrew White House.
No, I agree that's the only reason why Fidel Castro survived.
Okay, so you're saying
the fact that he was a literal Jesuit. Sermon Skolnick, for instance, the author, claimed that Fidel Castro was a Jesuit, hiding behind the left-wing label. And all you have to know, the Catholic Church never severed itself from Cuba. Like, there was a apostolic nuncio stationed in Cuba as of 1960 onward. And Fidel's brother also went to the same 3 Jesuit schools as Fidel, Raul, and he's the current leader of Cuba. So he's continuing the Jesuit communist experiment down there. And you can see how it's amazing how supposedly Cuba is just an enemy of the United States, and they put Guantanamo Bay down in Cuba. And I think that's another reason they've decided to put it in Cuba, is because they know how Jesuit controlled Raul Castro and the Cuban government is. Raul and Fidel. We gotta jump in there, George.
George, you trying to jump in?
You had the yes. So how is it that you have this Marine naval base in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, of a communist country, and it's been there for what, since at least the 1950s? And how is it, Cuba, Castro, Fidel Castro in his life never launched an attack on it? Was it because there wasn't any real hostilities between the CIA and Fidel Castro? That was just all for public consumption?
Well, George, Fidel Castro's sister, Juanita Castro, is a CIA agent. Like the Guardian newspaper even out of that. Juanita Castro was the CIA agent.
Okay, this is something sources, and I'm not going to mention our friend Eric John Phelps. But generally speaking, in order to be a puppet for Rome, there are certain requirements they have, or preferences. One, it's always good to be demonically possessed, and so a good vehicle by that is being a high-level Freemason. Two, if that doesn't work, being trained by the Jesuits. Three, a major part of that is sexual deviancy and perversion. So with Fidel Castro, he was supposed to have sired over 60 children. So
one of them being Justin Trudeau.
Possibly. I mean, that is a distinct possibility.
And wait, no, it's not. And I did a whole article on this, and I'll have to add this up there. And first of all, let me tell this clown, Jonathan Edwards, who has no content on his channel, stop being a contrarian. Stop being. Eric makes a fantastic case for this, and I'm absolutely sold. You're being a moron. That's silly. That's not arguing. That's not debate. You're just arguing just for the sake of arguing. So stop being a dipshit. You sound like a troll, and you're about to get banned out of here.
Yeah, I was saying I don't want to go into this too much, but because I could divert this whole stream into just going into connections between Francis Bacon and the King James. That's I think a topic for another discussion.
It is.
The identical headpiece on the 1611 King James Bible is on Bacon's original copy of his book Novum Organum. Identical headpiece. Anyone can verify this for themselves, but that's a separate topic. And just don't be here to be a contrarian. Good point, Johnny.
Stand by. Hey, Thomas, good to see you, man.
Well, if you want to look up a book, Jonathan Edwards, Manly P. Hall proved that Francis Bacon had a significant role in the King James Bible and that he was Shakespeare in his scholarly book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. That's over 900 pages. So there's a book that you could check out, Jonathan.
It's not even worth getting this up. I don't know where this person, why they would have, why it would be so important to them to argue against your good sense to it. But this is why I don't want to spend too much time on it. I'm already thrown off track. Where were we, George?
Well, we were talking about, Eric was talking about Francis Bacon and King James. I was talking about the Bay of Pigs and Guy Fawkes.
Right. And also, and I brought up how Fidel Castro was just the baby daddy to include Justin Trudeau. Originally, it came out this sort of a Russian vids type thing of, Justin Trudeau just happens to look like Fidel Castro. That's not the case to be made for it. That's not the case.
Hello?
The case is that. Hello? What are you doing right there, saying? The case is that the Trudeaus were hardcore leftists that frequently visited Castro. And what's Justin's mother's name?
Margaret.
Margaret. Good for you. Yeah, Margaret was well known to have many partners. And it is highly rumored that Fidel Castro was one of them. And there are pictures. I don't know, Eric, if you want to bring any of these up. Pictures of Castro holding up a baby. Now, the papal court yellow journalists explain this is Justin's brother. But that could easily be Justin, their love child. So if you want to, Eric, look up the photos of Castro holding up the Trudeau baby with them standing there. That's raises legitimate questions.
Okay, I'll pull this up here. And Justin Trudeau, like Fidel, had lifelong Jesuit schooling. Justin Trudeau went to the College de Jean Brébeuf in Quebec. You can see a photo of Justin with Pierre Trudeau. Justin's father was also trained by Jesuits like Justin at the same Jesuit college. But you can see a photo of Justin Trudeau with Pierre Trudeau when Justin's probably only 6 to 8 years old with Pope John Paul II. Yeah, I think this is the photo you're talking about here, Johnny.
Yep, perfect. That's the one. Okay, seriously, that's the wife of the Prime Minister of Canada getting this cozy. With it, what year is this? Someone at the time is just on the heels of possibly hosting Soviet nuclear missiles. Okay, why is the
so
Prime
this
Minister
picture of Fidel holding the baby and Margaret probably would have been for the early 1970s.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking this is from the 70s here. Yeah, good call, George. I'll have to maybe pull up the exact year. This is definitely from the 70s. I'm thinking, and then just this is Canada supposedly represents a quote democratic free society. Cuba is the complete antithesis of
172 there, but Justin was born. So this probably would have been. So you're talking probably 72, 73.
Yeah, that seems good to me.
So there's no question that Cuba is a serious problem for Western governments, particularly the United States and Canada. And it's just shocking and eye-opening for the Prime Minister and his wife to be that cozy with the comments, unless you factor in the Roman connection, to include the pedophile, sexual deviant, sleep with anything that moves connection, which John F. Kennedy was a part of as well. One of the reasons that contributed to his assassination. And I mentioned this last time. One of his sexual conquests was Mary Pinchot Meyer, and the CIA gave the management of his assassination to her ex-husband Cord Meyer, and he was very happy to do that. Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, I'm saying he's only like, he's young in this. He probably has to be only like 6. And he appreciate he tweeted this. Let me just pull up his Twitter status here. Yeah, he says, TBT to meeting Pope John Paul II. Read my statement on the 10th anniversary of his passing here.
Isn't that nice? And we're going to thank the church militant for pulling up the scandal when he was a high school teacher and he himself was involved with sexual improprieties with the students there.
Yes, I've heard that. This is the same school of people unaware that the blackface photos came from. This was people unaware. Our current prime minister, Jesuit trained, had absolutely zero political experience before becoming prime minister. He was just a drama teacher. He never even like had a job in a local government. Never even like stapled like documents for like a local like a senator, like a local city councilor, or like a premier in a province. Like he had absolutely zero like that. That's the only job he had really, was that he was teaching at this drama school in Vancouver where these allegations came from. And this is the same school where you saw him dressing as like the blackface photos, which took like a media storm. And like this whole last election was a sham just here in Canada. People aren't aware. The guy who ran against Trudeau, Andrew Scheer.
So are you saying Justin Trudeau is about as qualified to be prime minister, or Dwight Eisenhower were qualified to be president?
Yeah, that's a good point. He's just Eisenhower is another great example, because Eisenhower in this case had zero like military experience, never commanded a unit, and somehow he became the chief of the United States Army during World War II. Incredible fact. And you actually maybe this with Eisenhower. I don't know. Did you guys see the documentation I sent you of him speaking at Georgetown in 1958? I'll pull up those photos right here.
Tell the audience what the occasion was.
This was the occasion to build the new Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service building in 1958. So here's a photo with Eisenhower with the president of Georgetown at the time, Edward B. Bunn, S.J. Eisenhower in his speech, actually admits to playing while he was coaching the Catholic St. Mary's football team, St. Mary's College. He admits that he played against Georgetown and his lifelong friends, the Georgetown football coach. And it's kind of I think it's kind of like bold that Eisenhower did this, because 2 years before Eisenhower came here, and this is the photo, you can see where my mouse is. They put a bust of Edmund Walsh here, the Nuremberg lawyer, Jesuit priest here, Joseph Stalin's mentor. They put a bust of him here on the left. Now you can see Eisenhower speaking. But 2 years before Eisenhower came here, this Brigadier General Herbert C. Holdridge, people can see my screen here. This guy, interestingly, was chased out of the army during the 50s. Like he was forced out. But Brigadier Herbert C. Holdridge, March 12, 1956, he wrote to Eisenhower saying that about the Alaska Mental Health Bill. But he says here that this plot of wickedness revealed in this bill fairly reeks of the evil odor of the black forces of the Jesuits who dominate the Vatican and through officiates in our government dominate our policies. Eisenhower was briefed just 2 years before, by a patriotic general on the fact that the Jesuits were in control of the U.S. And, he shamelessly still went to Georgetown.
All right, if you want to know, you in the audience, if you want to know who it is that really controls things behind the scenes, all you need to do, the Father Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service is a single school inside a Jesuit university. Look at the alumni of the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. And if you don't walk away from looking at that list of alumni, knowing for sure that Jesuit-controlled Rome controls everything, then you're a fool or a fraud, as is everyone in so-called alternative media.
No, that's a fantastic point, John. You know what? Now that you brought that up, I'll go through. I'll just show, like, while you guys are talking, I'll bring up the screen share and just scroll down the massive, overwhelming list of alumni that come from that school. But look at what Eisenhower actually. I'm just quoting from his speech, and I'll link. I quoted this speech from the official presidential documents called "Public Papers of the President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower," containing the public messages, speeches, and statements of the President of the year 1958. January 1 to December 31, pages 733 to 735. But that's the source. But Eisenhower says here that I want to do another thing. I want to thank the University of Georgetown and the Society. That's the Society of Jesus, and all their supporters for the work they are doing in educating soldiers of peace. And then he says here, I am told of figures that were no later vintage than April 1957. That 87 of your graduates, Georgetown graduates, are actively working now in the foreign service. Possibly there have been hundreds through these 40 years. I repeat, possibly there have been hundreds through these 40 years. And Eisenhower says, I would hope your number would increase. And then Eisenhower, to wrap up the speech, he says, so to say that I'm honored today by the university, that I'm complimented by its presenting me its honorary doctorate, is a great understatement. I assure you that the presence here of these dedicated men and instructors and students in this audience is an inspiration, a memory that I shall carry with me. Thank you.
What a perfect puppet.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Like,
non-Catholic, right?
This guy literally like sold his soul to the Jesuits. Like, great point, Johnny. This guy's literally the perfect puppet.
Yeah, scroll through that alumni.
Yeah, I'll pull up that list right here. Because I want to say now, like, currently, like, over half of the current United States ambassadors have degrees from Georgetown. Like half of the current ambassadors stationed with in the U.S. is in legal relations with like 170 nations or whatever it is. Like half of them went to the Jesuit Georgetown. So I'm gonna pull up my screen share here. In this school, I think it was 1919. This school was created like right after World War I.
Hey, George, absolutely. And George, you know who founded Georgetown?
John Carroll.
A Jesuit by the name of John Carroll. Someone that Eric John Phelps doesn't know exists.
Oh, okay, so we could
your
address...
friend, your pal.
Okay, touche. Yes. Well, I'm not sure how to respond to that.
That's okay. We're proud of you.
Okay, so anyhow, and John Carroll was the first Catholic prelate, bishop in the United States. He was the bishop of Baltimore, Maryland, and he founded Georgetown Preparatory School in 1789, the same year as the university. And as we've discussed before on the show, and just as a reminder, Georgetown Prep is the alma mater of Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, and Brian Cashman, the general manager of the New York Yankees.
Oh, also the founder of chemotherapy went there, Zeb Sufrat. Chemotherapy that has like an only 10% like effectiveness rate, which basically just basically poisons people. We can thank Jesuit-educated Zeb Sufrat for chemotherapy.
Well, something I mentioned to Eric before we went on live, and the other, speaking of Georgetown or people who are trained by the Jesuits and bred in circuses, the Hegelian dialectic. Last week, the Washington Nationals defeated the American League Houston Astros to win the World Series. The Nationals are the current incarnation of the old Montreal Expos. I know I've seen Eric wear an old Expo cap before, so I guess he is somewhat fond of them. So anyhow, we talked about when we did our last show last month. We talked about the general manager of the Nationals, Mike Rizzo. Well, it is de rigueur that when an American sports team wins some sort of championship, the president will invite that team to the White House, whether you're talking about the Super Bowl winner or the NBA champions or whatever the case may be. So the president extended that honor to the Nationals. Well, the Nationals have a left-handed relief pitcher by the name of Sean Doolittle, who is a distant cousin of Jimmy Doolittle, the Freemasonic pilot from World War II, who his raid was blown up, has been blown up, so to speak. Well, no pun intended, in several films. The most famous one of which was 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. And the raid didn't really do much damage. I think they might have destroyed an outhouse and killed an old man who had a heart because he had a heart attack or something. But anyhow, this Kurt Doolittle, Sean, is a relief pitcher for the Nationals. So he declined to meet the president because he said he's not a big fan of his. Well, in addition to Sean's lineage, he has an intriguing wife, Ariane Dolan. She herself was triple dipped. She did a year at the Catholic Religious Institute in Paris, France. She got her undergrad degree in religious studies from the University of San Diego, and she got her master's degree from Fordham in religious studies. And so, as I said, Dolan and his wife, or rather Doolittle and his wife Dolan, said they weren't going to meet with the president because they don't like him. They don't like his views on immigration, on race, LGBTQ issues. And speaking of LGBTQ issues, Doolittle actually came up in the American League, and he played for several years for the Oakland Athletics. And while he was pitching for Oakland, they're both involved. Doolittle and Dolan were heavily involved with charities. So, at the behest of Ariane Dolan, back in 2015, the Oakland Coliseum hosted its first Pride Night. So, as I said, Ariane Dolan got her master's degree from Fordham, which Donald Trump attended himself. He later transferred to University of Pennsylvania, where he got his sheepskin. So this whole flap.
That's a great example of the Hegelian. I have to say that these commitards who shit themselves over the pedophile president really are showing themselves to be just a bunch of as much hot air as Trump. What has Trump done? He hasn't done anything. He's just said a lot of dumbass things, which was his purpose, to make a fat fool of himself. At no point have we done anything of substance.
I mean, guys, I had like this fake liberal. I call it like fake liberal outrage against Trump. Is just you can see how it's all blowing smoke. Just for instance, like they hammer on how Trump is like separating families. Like it was actually Jesuit-educated Bill Clinton who went to Georgetown. While you guys are talking, I'm going down the Georgetown alumni. But it was Georgetown alumni Bill Clinton who actually created the policy for separating families. You know, for instance. So it's also
he was running things when they made that propaganda show of little Elian Gonzalez, of ripping Elian Gonzalez out of his mommy's and daddy's arms and sending him back to Cuba. I think it was. All smoke and mirrors to continue to bolster because the Roman Catholic boy buggering scum have us neck deep in illegal immigrants, and that's not enough. We need to be drowning in illegals, in Roman Catholic illegals. All you can see is our little American, true, actually born American fingertips above the endless sea. Generations, decades of high treason, every single politician involved and who has in any way helped the borders to stay open and in any way contributed to whatever the ludicrous number is, 22, 20, 23, $20 gazillion of national debt, should all be tried for treason and shot or whatever is appropriate for the execution method. Absolutely unbelievable. Continue to push this ludicrous. No country in the world is killing itself with completely wide open borders. And this fat pedophile clown is how he's managed to get as far as he is without having done a single thing about his biggest promise is no less surprising than Barack Obama and his big promise to close Guantanamo Bay. And the purpose of Guantanamo Bay is to create more jihadis, to torture innocent Middle Easterners into hating America and hating the West, and killing soldiers, which is what their job is, which is why the Navy, United States Navy, has a base in Cuba for that purpose, a rendition site outside of the continental United States where they don't have to obey domestic laws, not that they would anyway, on torturing prisoners. Real quick, we had talked about the Carroll family, the Carroll dynasty, that Mr. White Power, Eric John Phelps, the incognito Jesuit priest that is now George's best friend forever. The Carroll family dynasty is proof that Saucy had a pretty good point, and that the United States was founded from the very beginning to be the sword arm of the Catholic Church. There was still plenty of hatred for England at the time. Charles Carroll is the individual that George Washington resigned his commission to at the conclusion of the war. There's actually a painting in the Capitol Rotunda, which is patterned after Rome itself, with the giant phallus of Osiris on one side and the womb of Isis on the other. And Eric's got a great documentary on the Roman Catholic foundings of Washington, D.C. that he did recently.
With John McShane, the people aren't aware of that. In his biography, coincidentally, it cost like 500 Canadian dollars for the cheapest copy. Must be a coincidence, though, that they don't want people reading that book. But yeah, this guy was educated by Jesuits at St. Joseph's Prep, Georgetown. Also went to Catholic LaSalle College. Was a papal knight of St. Gregory the Great, a knight of Malta, a knight of the Holy Sepulchre, and I believe he was also a knight commander of St. Sylvester. The point being, this guy was a devout Catholic. And John McShane and his construction company built the Pentagon. They built Jefferson Memorial. They renovated the White House in 1951. And
they laid the first stone of the pentagram on September 11th, 1941, just a couple of weeks before Pearl Harbor.
Well, wow, there you go. That's definitely not a coincidence. And there's another interesting September 11th, just going back. It was September 11th, 1911, that the Jesuit Manresa Retreat House opened in New York City. But I don't think this to your point on the Jesuits creating America, Johnny. I don't think Tupper Saucy quoted this excerpt in his book, but this is just further evidence, to his great book, Rulers of Evil, that the Jesuits, had something to do with the founding of America. But this is in Appleton's Encyclopedia of American Biography. This was written all the way back in 1885. But this author says here that. And you can see, Dr. Franklin was lifelong friends with the Jesuit priest John Carroll. This is the founder of Georgetown. The excerpt
is that Hellfire Club Ben Franklin?
Yes, same Hellfire Club Ben Franklin. And actually, maybe see if I can pull this up. I was on Clint's blog. If people haven't, I did an interview with researcher Clint Richardson recently. But on Clint's blog, he actually shows a coin stampage that Franklin issued at this time, and it actually has like the Jesuit kind of IHS sunburst in the back. Let me see if I can pull that up after this. But Appleton's Encyclopedia says no greater power of combined wealth, intellect, and enthusiasm existed anywhere in America than the union of the Carrolls and the Jesuits in Maryland in the person of John Carroll. So I think that's a pretty profound statement. And I actually found a Jesuit priest who is actually involved with the American Revolution. I added this in a comment on this video. Let me pull this up here. This guy, his name was Pierre. I don't think the Tupper Saucy mentioned this guy either, but this guy is just a very obscure figure. I haven't seen this guy mentioned really in any history books. You can see my screen here. Let me confirm I'm screen shared. Okay, but see here, Pierre Gabault. See, and interestingly, you mentioned how there was at this time, like a violent resistance, there was a Jesuit hatred of Great Britain at this time. But and the Wikipedia article says here, but you see, Pierre Gabault was a Jesuit priest, Jesuit missionary and priest in the Northwest Territory in the 18th century, and an American patriot during the American Revolution. He's here in France, lost the Northwest Territory to Great Britain in 1763. Jesuit priests were expelled. And this guy was appointed Vicar General of the Archbishop of New York, Jean-Olivier Briand, at the time. But this Jesuit priest who took part in the fighting of the American Revolution, pretty sure has a statue of him in Vincennes, Indiana. Here's a statue of the Jesuit Gabalt here in front of the old cathedral. And this is pretty deep history. Like I have on my Wikipedia here. I think we may have mentioned this in passing on one of our previous briefs. Oh, let me see here. It's a different article, but the Knights of Malta actually almost got into full diplomatic relations with the United States in 1794. This is when James Monroe was a foreign minister, and James Monroe, this just shows. Like I think this proof as well shows that the Jesuits had something to do with the creation of America. Why have there been Jesuit priests related to American presidents? Like Father Andrew Francis Monroe, S.J., a descendant of President James President James Monroe, and then you had Father Robert Francis Taft, S.J., a descendant of William Howard Taft, Skull and Bonesman president. That's another just side fact that shows the Jesuits created or had something to do with the creation of America. But this came, I'll link this article in the live chat, but this comes from a proposed alliance between the Order of Malta and the United States, 1794, suggestions made between James Monroe as American minister in Paris, written in the William and Mary Quarterly. You can see the exact document right here, where the Knights of Malta proposed that there's a commercial interest between the two sovereign nations. The Knights of Malta, they're within the Catholic Church, but they have their own diplomatic status as well, and that's why the Knights of Malta have a permanent observer status in the United Nations, for instance. But, this is deep, and I did an article also on Don Diego de Gardaqui. I think that's on up here. The first Spanish ambassador to the United States was a devout Catholic, and his banking house was funding the American Revolution. This guy had a Catholic cardinal as his brother, the first Spanish ambassador to the U.S. George Washington gave this guy a copy of the book Don Quixote, this guy gave George Washington a copy of Don Quixote, a famous Catholic novel. And George Washington, they admitted on the Washington Post even this his rules of civility, right, were ghostwritten by Jesuits. That's that's verified history. Oh, I didn't realize Johnny was out of the.
Yeah, I got kicked out from this computer.
Were you able to hear that?
Yeah, I got it all, and it's a great point. Many people don't know that the Knights of Malta are themselves a sovereign entity. I don't even know how the hell that works, but Don Quixote is a well-known metaphor for Ignatius Loyola. And the author who wrote Don is a hyper devout Roman Catholic, pretty sure.
Cervantes?
Yeah. Thanks, George. Thanks. A hyper devout Roman Catholic, right, George? A Spaniard. Spanish Roman Catholic, right, George?
I believe so. I mean, I always think of the windmills.
Yeah. Metaphor. That's why that's involved in the Skull and Bones. When they get naked and bugger each other in a coffin, they also give each other copies of Don Quixote and kiss the slippered toe of the Pope and then stick it in their bottom and whatever else that they do.
Okay, so well, there again, we were talking about this earlier. There comes the whole sexual deviancy and perversion angle. We've had here in the United States, we've had at least three Skull and Bonesmen who've been president. Both George Bush's and Taft.
Taft was the only one to also be Supreme Court Chief Justice in his career too.
Yes.
Also, John. I think it was Taft who nominated Edward Douglas White to as the Chief Justice. And
Roman Catholic Edward White.
Roman Catholic Jesuit trained who signed on the Federal Reserve Act. It was Skull and Bones Taft who appointed him, and actually it was Doc who found this brilliantly just way back. Doc found that the Taft actually toured the Jesuit College in New Orleans when he went there back in, and actually I archived that. I'll put that in the chat. I found this from the New Orleans Bar Association. Taft actually toured the Jesuit College.
That would have been New Orleans, Loyola, New Orleans.
I believe it was either Loyola New Orleans or Jesuit High in New Orleans. He toured one of those two.
Well, could have been both, but anyhow, that reminds me. We were talking about sexual deviancy and perversion. We talked about the Trudeau family. Earlier, we we're talking about Margaret, Justin's mom, and his father, Justin's putative father, Pierre. Pierre was a notorious womanizer. I mean, he had a girl in every port. Jacques Chirac was a famous womanizer, the president of France back in the 1970s and 80s. Let's just talk about some figures in the U.S. We've talked about Donald Trump, so I'm not going to go there. Barack Obama. Barack Obama is alleged bisexual, if not a full-on homosexual. We talked about both Bushes, the fact that they're a skull and bonesman. There's really no need to talk about Bill Clinton. Ronald Reagan was an alleged adulterer and alleged child molester. You have Lyndon Johnson, JFK, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman. So many, if not most, of the U.S. presidents have been at least adulterers.
Yeah, that angle, George, is an angle of control as well. And it was surprising for me to see both Sue Ford and Kathy O'Brien mention so many prominent people, particularly presidents at the time. It just it's shocking to try and think of these people be that satanically deviant.
Well, I know with Kathy O'Brien, she zeroed in on Gerald Ford, right, to being a super deviant. And then and she claimed Pierre Trudeau was a Jesuit and that Pierre Trudeau molested her. I have a video of that.
And he was also into watching animals violate children. A real big nasty creep. She also mentioned Romney, the elder Romney,
George,
governor of Michigan. Yeah,
George.
Yeah, thank you, George. Yeah, George Romney. Yeah.
He would have been a Mormon as well, right? George Romney, I assume.
Well, I mentioned this to you before. Just speaking of George Romney, he was governor of Michigan back in the 1960s. And I know we talked about this probably a year ago, but just to refresh your memory, back in July 1967, there was a big riot at a bar in Detroit, and it got out of hand. So the the local police responded, but they couldn't handle it. So they called in the other local police departments, and they couldn't help out. So the local sheriffs, they went in. So finally, the mayor of Detroit, Jerome Kavanaugh, asked the governor, George Romney, if he would send in the National Guard to help out. So he did, but they couldn't quell the riots. So the governor at the time of Michigan, George Romney, got a hold of the president of the United States at the time, Lyndon Johnson, to see if he could help out. So Johnson sent in the 101st Airborne into Detroit to take it over. So even though this is completely illegal, unconstitutional, they did it anyhow. So the 101st Airborne went into Detroit and I guess ran the town for several weeks.
Yeah, that's a great history, and I'm pretty sure you can still see some footage. Like I know there's some documentaries even on YouTube covering the Detroit riots. You can see footage of the Jesuit-trained mayor Jerome Kavanaugh speaking about the quote lawlessness and anarchy taking place in Detroit, and this shows the Jesuit coup d'état that has taken place. This was with Roosevelt, with his Emergency Banking Act. March 9, 1933, he put the United States into a permanent state of national emergency. I have the Senate document. I'll link the U.S. Senate. It's admitted by the U.S. Senate that the United States has been in a permanent state of national emergency, and that most Americans have spent an entire life in emergency rule. But the point being, though, in a state of national emergency, the Constitution, I guess, is just like John J. McCloy actually wrote in his quoted in the Chairman book by Kai Bird, a biography on John J. McCloy. He said the Constitution is just like a scrap piece of paper. But with the National Emergency Declaration, that's essentially, I guess, what has happened. So So what happened in Detroit, it is legal in a situation. Like Johnson, declared a national emergency before he sent the soldiers in, the 101st Airborne. And that gave him legal they guess with the legal right to do it. But people know Franklin D. Roosevelt, was related to a Catholic priest, James Roosevelt Bailey, Archbishop of Newark, powerful Catholic archbishop. This Archbishop of Newark, James Roosevelt Bailey, was very close with the John Hughes, the same Catholic priest that got the Protestant Bibles out of the public schools. That's another interesting fact, that the Catholic Church crusaded to get religion out of education.
Yes, because the so-called secular state feeds into their agenda. You have the government crushing all apparent faiths and religions, then the secret manipulator behind the scenes can control it all under the guise of the so-called secular state. Meanwhile, you have Catholic priests serving in official capacities in the United States government, from the prosecutors, from the Jesuit priest who prosecuted, I think it was Jeffrey Dahmer, to the Jesuit priest who prosecuted Tupper Saucy, to the SR-71 Teddy Hesburgh, who served in official capacities in the United States government, to let's see, who was running Boys Town? I gotta remember his name. Hupp, right?
Flanagan?
No.
Oh, Monsignor Robert Hupp. Yeah, he was the United Nations Commissioner for activities dealing with children.
Yeah. What
a child human trafficking watch committee at the UN had this.
I also want to address the joke of elections. When you have these generations of Roman Catholic corruptocrats holding and maintaining power, or their puppets in secret societies, or the Mormons, or the Freemasons, or the pervert deviants, from the Romneys to the daddy and son governor pair. How many different families can we get into of generational control? The Dodds up in Connecticut, the Boggses in Louisiana, the Kumos, the Roman Catholic communist scum traitor Kumos. That bastard Andrew Cuomo is just destroying the state of New York up there. Absolutely destroying.
Well, I think the official name now is the People's Republic of New York.
It is.
So
it is.
Change the name to that.
To the almost Jesuit priest Moonbeam Brown down there in California, and his daddy was the governor too. I had no idea. I just found this in researching for my book. Hyper pro-slaughter abortion, Kathleen Sebelius down there in Kansas, who Barack Obama, she was such a despicable harpy monster bitch, pro-slaughter, that she supported the most heinous, despicable abortionists. There is an abortionist in Kansas that was eating the unborn babies. I shit you not. Rajas, I think his name is. That was one of hers. George Tiller, who was shot by being a late-term abortionist, shot by a schizophrenic, a bipolar schizophrenic. George Tiller was one of hers. She was having secret meetings with him. Kathleen, I had no idea this was until I looked her up yesterday. A Roman Catholic, another daddy and daughter partner pair. He was governor somewhere else. And of course, I guarantee, where was she born? Not born in Kansas. How does this work, George?
Okay, let me get back to Sebelius. Hang on a second. I'm looking her up.
I'm just saying this whole thing, they don't have to be born. They don't have to be born in the state that they run and control.
Well, I mean, for example, you had Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was governor of California. He was born in Austria.
Oh, was it his wife went to Jesuit Georgetown? What was her name?
Oh, she's a Kennedy. Schreiber, Maria Schreiber.
Yeah, Maria Sergeant Schreiber's daughter, right? Who Sergeant Schreiber was a Knight of Columbus, I think.
Yes, and he's good friends with Jack Kennedy.
Oh wow! So just on that, you can see how plugged in Schwarzenegger is. Let alone the fact that his daddy was a Nazi in Catholic Austria.
Yes, and for what it's worth, I mean, I don't mean to. Well, I realize Schwarzenegger is still alive, but when he was 18 in 1965, he was supposed to, according to law, he was supposed to do a year in the Austrian army, and he didn't meet that. He didn't fulfill his obligation. He kept going AWOL each weekend so he could compete in bodybuilding competitions. And I know this may sound like a nitpicking point, but it's just like he couldn't. He barely fulfilled his obligation to the Austrian army because he was so obsessed, with being the next Mr. Universe.
Yeah, just real quick, Sibelius was born in Cincinnati, another big Catholic town, and Daddy John Jack Gilligan was the governor there. As a matter of fact, this is a big news item there. I think they were governor simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So that harlot, good Catholic girl, so pro-abortion that she supported George Tiller, and I'll give you that name of that other monster who was eating fetuses after aborting them in Kansas. That's what a despicable. And Barack Obama's teleprompter told him to make that monster, Harpy, his Secretary of Health and Human Services. What a perfect pick if you're Rome, the deviants in Rome, laughing at the people of the United States.
Well, I was going on Obama. I'm going to link these articles. His ambassador to the Vatican while Obama was in office was also very pro-abortion. His name was Ken Hackett, Jesuit trained at Boston College. And this article is titled "Federally Funded Catholic Relief Services Paid Future Obama Ambassador $384K." This article also highlights how there was some the traditionalist Catholics were outraged that Ken Hackett, who went to Jesuit Boston College, the ambassador to the Vatican, could support abortion, while being a Catholic.
Eric, it's unusual. Like I was thinking of the Kennedy family. It's unusual. The Kennedy family should be such hyper devout Roman Catholics, and yet still so all for abortion. And there's no contradiction. How is that possible? Did they get coaching or help?
Well, actually, I think I have the quote. Yeah, this was the net. Yeah, this I have right from the source here. We'll read it from Albert R. Johnson, who was an ex-Jesuit who was part of this. This was when in 1964, you could say an army of Jesuit priests went to the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport, I believe Hyannisport, Massachusetts, Hyannisport, Connecticut. But this is let me see here. I have the quote here. So this was this is from Albert Johnson's book, The Birth of Bioethics. You can get this book off of libgen.is for free, Library Genesis. The ex-Jesuit says, Albert Johnson, during the summer of 1964, after my first year of graduate studies, I plunged quite unexpectedly into politics of the abortion debate. This is a Jesuit saying this. I was teaching an ethics course in the summer school at the University of San Francisco. While walking across the campus one foggy morning, I was hailed by another visiting professor, Father Joseph Fuchs, a Jesuit, a distinguished German theologian from the Gregorian University in Rome. Father Fuchs asked if I knew the name Sergeant Shriver. When I told him that Mr. Shriver was the brother-in-law of the late President Kennedy, he said Mr. Shriver had invited him to the Kennedy compound at Hyannisport for a meeting of a few Catholic theologians to discuss the political aspects of abortion. Mr. Shriver had explained that Senator Edward Kennedy was standing for re-election in Massachusetts and Robert Kennedy was running in New York. The Kennedys hoped to formulate a political stance on abortion that would be compatible both to Catholic teaching and with the political climate of the country. Father Fuchs had responded that he knew nothing of the American political climate, but he agreed to attend the meeting if he could bring along a young American theologian. Mr. Shriver agreed. Father Fuchs then asked me to accompany him for the next 2 days. I briefed the courtly German Jesuit on American law and attitudes towards abortion. We flew to Boston, where we were driven to a breakneck speed to Hyannisport by fellow Jesuit Robert F. Drinan, then dean of Boston College Law School and later a Democratic congressman. Imagine that, an ordained Jesuit priest is a United States congressman, and the media doesn't talk about it, whatever, whatsoever. But continuing, the small group met on occasion on the ocean terrace of Robert Kennedy's home. Both Kennedy brothers were briefly present. Earl Shriver, Dr. Andre E. Helligers, Father Richard A. McCormick, a Jesuit, Father Charles E. Curran, a Jesuit, professor of moral theology at Catholic University, Jesuit Father Fuchs, Jesuit Father Drinan, and I, the novice among them, struggled with the problem posed to us. Father McCormick, the Jesuit, was particularly articulate. I recall his careful exposition of the thesis of our fellow Jesuit scholar, the late John Courtney Murray, that distinguished between the moral aspects of an issue and the feasibility of enacting legislation about that issue. Let me see here. That's incredible Jesuit doublespeak, because that's what the Jesuits saying. It's okay to put immoral things into law, but it's not okay to do immoral things.
The Roman Catholic Church is the biggest fraud on the abortion issue. It is amazing that the PSYOP has lasted this long. Everything you need to know about the Catholic Church wanting and enabling the slaughter of the unborn can be said in the office of ordained Jesuit priest Robert Drinan, the only Catholic priest to serve in office in Congress openly, a far left pro-abortion Democrat. Tells you everything you need to know about where the Catholic Church stands on the issue of abortion. Complete and total fraud. If you're pro-life and you're Catholic, you're in the wrong religion, period.
And actually, Leo Varadkar, the Catholic premier of France, who actually recently he reopened the convent that John McShane, the builder of Washington, the devout Catholic, his daughter became a nun in Ireland and lived in a convent there. And Leo Varadkar recently used taxpayer dollars to refurnish.
That's lovely. Yeah, Varadkar is the prime minister in Ireland.
Prime minister in Ireland, yeah, and you've shown the photo, but he came to Washington and was praising the abortion.
Embraced by all the Catholic communists in New York City during the St. Patrick's Day parade, led by Timothy Dolan, who was happy to invite homosexual activists into the parade, infuriating conservative Catholics. De Blasio, the commie-tard Catholic, and Cuomo, and Pete King, the so-called conservative Republican Roman Catholic, all of them were very happy to have them there.
Yeah, and there was and this was right around when Varadkar passed abortion legislation into Catholic Ireland, which you say is kind of, I guess, unprecedented given how.
Yeah, he led the way. He led the way for Roman Catholic Ireland to usher in abortion.
And that should show that because then still I think in the Philippines they're talking about it now, but in hyper Catholic Latin American countries, it's still the old traditional conservative view that the church has on abortion. So, but you see in more Western countries, the Catholic Church, puts on the cloak, and ultimately this gives them more power too, because today's modern voting base, it's I would say more voters, I would say, support abortion due to the liberal nature of education and the media and all of this. So the Jesuits know by getting Catholic candidates behind abortion issues, it's good for them politically, as well. Andrew Cuomo is the case in point of that. After they can abort a baby in New York 30 minutes before it's due now. And when he passed this legislation, he lit up the World Trade Center in pink. This guy is a devout Catholic, went to Jesuit Fordham University. Nick Dolan has never once criticized him. Once.
It's absolutely infanticide. The Catholic Church is a joke on this issue. There's a whole host of things the Catholic Church can do to pressure these far left pro-abortion at any point in the baby's development politicians. The Catholic Church is a whole, from excommunication all the way down to forbidding the Eucharist during their Mass, a whole host, and not a single one has had anything in the slightest way. They recently have all shitting themselves because one lowly priest denied Joe Biden, plugs thug Joe Biden, the Eucharist at Mass. Oh, he'll never do that again.
That was not a bishop. That was just a local,
a regular priest. And Mark says Milton's got something today. I haven't seen him today, Mark.
And let me just, I'll finish up this Johnson just finishes up the quote I was reading here. She's talking about going to Hyannisport with, and like I mentioned like 6 or 7 Jesuits in that block of text here, but this is page 290 of his book, The Birth of Bioethics. He finishes up saying, Father Richard McCormick, who is a Jesuit again, applied this thesis to contemporary abortion debate in America prior to the Roe v. Wade decision. He concluded, and to the best of my memory, the other theologians present concurred, that the translation of a rigorously restrictive ethics of abortion into law was unlikely to be enforceable or to achieve its positive goals without significant attendant social evils. These theologians, enclosed in agreement on the morality of abortion as taught by their church, favored a public policy that followed the lines of the American Laws Institute proposed model statute on abortion that had been drafted in 1962, and at the time of the Hyannisport conclave had been enacted in about a dozen states. That's the end of the quote there. So there's even kind of an admission there too that like they know that ultimately this is going to lead to a lot of destruction of life. And even like it's crazy. Like if you look at some of the, there's it's up to like 30 to 40% of babies are aborted in certain states. And like I would say I'm not like all out like I think like in a case where like if there's certain extreme cases where if a woman doesn't get something done, she's gonna die. In certain extreme cases like that, I'm for it. But you can't just treat. It's ultimately like treating the fetus like a commercial property. And
it's been used commercially. The fetal tissue has been used in everything under the sun, to include soda, Pepsi. It really is absolutely disgusting, despicable, and they do it on purpose. They laugh, they slaughter these unborn children, and then give it to us to eat and drink, and we have no idea what it is.
No, I definitely think there's something to that. This is Jesuit black magic. Helena Blavatsky said the Jesuits are the biggest black magicians on the earth. No one even comes close. And she's known as like, as like a high authority on occult matters. She specifically said the Jesuits are the biggest black magicians, on the earth, and that's how they deal. Like that's how they, amass much of their power, which is through black magic.
Yeah, I would consider her an authority.
So going back, like I don't know, it's just ultimately I think it's a political as well as black magic, side to it as well, because they do know that just today's political culture, like for instance, like this is like devout Catholic Andrew Scheer, a big reason why he lost the election in Canada is because the Canadians have been so brainwashed to just mindlessly accept the question on abortion, LGBT matters, and immigration, that Scheer, just because he said 15 years ago that he didn't support abortion, that's the reason why he lost. Because he said it 15 years ago that they don't support abortion, and he was just as much of a puppet of the Vatican as Trudeau. Andrew Scheer was a deacon in the Ottawa Catholic Church, but the whole Jesuit Trudeau machine was just hammering that Andrew Scheer doesn't support abortion, Andrew Scheer doesn't support gay marriage, he's a bigot. How can you vote this the dark age bigot into the office? He doesn't support abortion. Blah 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 blah. That was actually the I guess the essence of the Trudeau political machine, with just hammering on him that he didn't support abortion. So it's kind of like I'm saying, with all the indoctrination nowadays, it's almost like it's very hard to take like a rational pro-abortion stance without just being hammered as like a religious kook. And again, Trudeau was educated by Jesuits, and he was hammering Catholic Andrew Scheer as being like a kook for saying 10 years ago that he thought that abortion, should be stopped.
And the extremes of abortion that are wide open now, and like you said, Ireland, New York, Kansas, what these monsters, I mean, fully formed babies, you have to be inhuman to hold a fully formed baby and then jam a pair of scissors in the back of her neck to murder her. You have to be an absolute monster to be able to do that. And that's some of the shit. That's the nicest thing they've done. The instruments they stick into these women's wombs. And many of these women were dying. The only reason, and like Gosnell in Philadelphia, finally been brought to trial. The only reason these monsters are coming to trial is because they're actually killing the mothers with the babies.
Well, Johnny, if you read the extreme oath of the Jesuits, or the fourth vow. It doesn't mention it by name, but it essentially talks about abortion. When they're talking about all the things they'll do to their enemies, Protestants, liberals, and other heretics, is we'll rip their babies out of their womb.
George, that is a brilliant connection. I absolutely confer with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly, that abortion can be traced back to the Jesuit oath, and they see the victims of abortion, the vast majority, as their enemies. They absolutely see that. And if you really want to know who they think their enemies are, look at the number of minorities. Look at where the abortion clinics are placed in the big cities.
Well, of course, Margaret Sanger said she believed that minorities in general, and blacks in particular, were basically a weed. And the most humane thing to do to them was to get rid of them, preferably kill them in the mother's womb or shortly thereafter.
Oh, great point. And if people aren't aware, that's Catholic, Roman Catholic Margaret Sanger, who thought black people were like the scum of the earth.
And of course, I mentioned this on the show over a year ago. John Rock, the developer of the pill, the birth control pill, was a devout Roman Catholic. He remained in communion with the church until his death. Now, something Johnny mentioned a few minutes ago was Joe Biden and the fact that there's this priest, a lowly parish priest, I believe in South Carolina, Moray, who denied him communion. Yes, that will happen every now and then, here and there. But for the most part, that does not happen. I mean, as a matter of fact, my local representative is Mike Thompson, Charles Michael Thompson, out of Napa. And when he first went to Congress in the 1980s, somewhat interesting, he wrote a letter to the then bishop or archbishop, I believe it was McCarrick, Theodore Cardinal McCarrick, saying, hey, you know what? I went to Mass this last Sunday, and the priest wouldn't give me communion because of my views of abortion. Could you do something about it? And as a matter of fact, dozens of fellow Catholic representatives signed this letter. And so, we would like, even though we're not in official agreement with the church's position on issues like abortion, we still like to receive, because, this is a nuanced issue. So I guess McCarrick said, very well, I'll go have a word with him. But that's, I know.
Pedophile Theodore McCarrick, out of where? Washington, D.C. It seems like the biggest child rapers are given to positions of prominence.
Well, McCarrick was great to be right there with George Bush, like during Gannon Gate, when literally male prostitute Jeff Gannon, with a non-journalist.
They probably passed him around.
McCarrick, this is a perfect relationship, I guess, with him and Bush. And you can see 50 photos, literally over 50, with Bush and McCarrick. They were great, very, very close buddies.
It was your find on the on Skolnick, writing about how H.W. Bush encouraged his Skull and Bones son to have a homosexual relationship with Victor Ashe, the mayor of, was it Knoxville?
Yeah, Knoxville, Tennessee. And then while Bush was president, he made Victor Ashe mayor or ambassador to Catholic Poland.
Yeah, it was a perfect fit. Victor Ashe, the perfect fit to be ambassador to Poland. He's the first thing I think of. And it's Skolnick that admits that outs them, Skull and Bones, not that they get in naked and get in the coffin. That's what the mainstream media tells you. Well, they're weird, man. They get naked. No, they get naked with each other and sodomize each other in a coffin as to seal the deal in Skull and Bones. That's everyone that's in Skull and Bones, including guys like John Kerry and William F. Buckley.
Well, absolutely. And William F. Buckley and John Kerry, if people don't know, are educated by Jesuits. Buckley, I think, was educated by him in Britain, in Stonyhurst. And Buckley also is a Knight of Malta. And Kerry went to Jesuit Boston College. He got his doctorate there, I believe. And he's also a bonesman who recently married into the Heinz ketchup dynasty.
George Walker Bush was also educated at Stonyhurst.
Yeah, George. Yeah, that's the namesake. He was the bank. He was a Wall Street banker between like 1920 and 1940. He's who George Herbert Walker Bush and George Walker Bush are named after. George Herbert Walker. Yeah, you're right. That's a fantastic point. People aren't aware of that. I'll link his wiki page.
A banker. He was a banker. And I'll also bring back up again, we brought this up several times, that oh my goodness, Kathy O'Brien. Kathy O'Brien accused H.W. Bush of being such an extreme pedophile that he particularly went after toddlers. You have to be a sick, twisted piece of debris to sexually abuse toddlers. And we'll remind the audience that H.W. Bush 41 had a toddler that supposedly died of leukemia or something that suspiciously could have been sacrificed. And his wife, Barbara, was very likely the love child of Aleister Crowley during one of his so-called workings in Paris, one of their satanic sex rituals, literally satanic sex rituals.
Oh, it's undeniable. Like like even in the art and I know the Washington Times even I think wrote an article like back in 1988 about homosexuality with George H.W. Bush. In the Skolnick interview I have posted, like it's one of the first images that comes up in the slideshow, for instance. So like, it came out like openly that H.W. Bush is an extreme deviant. And like you said, the Aleister Crowley thing, it's extreme, it's concerning, to say the least. And Bush was, a lot of people don't know how close he was, the HW, with the Catholic Church. He went to Notre Dame University more than any other American president. I guess he was the 41st president. Up to that time, there was no other president who went to Notre Dame University more than George H.W. I find that a little odd, considering also how deviant he is.
He was spending a lot of time with SR-71 Teddy.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it. Yeah, so he must have been, Hesburgh. I'm sure people dig, and there's stuff out there on him too. But I just wanted to wrap this up with abortion. This kind of just ties into all of the deviance that we're talking about here with Rome and her agents. But this was a Theodore Greisinger. If you see my screen here, I made this article exposing the repulsiveness of Jesuit morality. Well, this is some spam I have coming up here, malware on my computer. Pardon that. But you see here, the Jesuits, this was from 1885, and Theodore Greisinger quotes Father Ario. He says, "The getting rid of an immature child is likewise considered to be allowable by the sons of Loyola, at least in certain cases, which, however, of a very flexible character." And as Father Ario writes regarding to this in his book, Propositions sur la Synamique Précède de Decalogue, page 322, quote, "One asks whether a woman may make use of means to obtain abortion. I answer yes, if quickening has not taken place and the pregnancy is not dangerous. But even if there has been a quickening already and it may be effected as soon as a conviction is arrived at that she must die by the birth. Under all circumstances, however, a young person who has been led astray may do so as her honor must be to her more precious than the life of the child." So this is the Jesuits pontificating back in the 18th or in the late 19th century that abortion is...
the quickening is labor pain. So in other words, the Jesuit says it's okay to murder the baby up until and through the labor pains, which is monstrous.
Excuse me, I know we're almost over. Can I just mention something on John Jack Gilligan? I know you're talking about him earlier in his daughter Kathleen Sebelius, but I was just looking him up. Gilligan got his undergrad degree from Notre Dame. Prior to that, he went to Xavier High School in Cincinnati. He also was a professor at Xavier University in Cincinnati. And for good measure, he won a Silver Star in World War II in the Navy as a gunner on a destroyer at the Battle of Okinawa. Now, I'm not exactly sure,
George. I'm sure that there were no strings pulled to make to see that he got a silver. I'm sure that Jesuit-trained Roman Catholic completely earned that medal.
Yes. So I have no idea what he did. He was a gunnery officer on a destroyer at Okinawa. But so he wasn't actually on the beach.
Yeah, some people would say, come on, dude, all the fighting was done by the Marines. How are you getting a silver fucking star? But listen, don't look into it like that. Pardon my language. Don't examine it. Just trust that sitting on a destroyer, he did some heroic shit.
Well, I mean, it wasn't as if he was a corpsman or something. He was rescuing, wounded Marines or something, or he was a pilot. And don't
Hey,
get me wrong.
next you're going to be questioning Wild Bill Donovan's Medal of Honor. Come on, it's getting out of hand here.
Or George W. Bush's Navy Cross. Oh, I'm sorry, George H.W. Bush's Navy Cross.
Yeah, good for you, George. Yeah, and all his heroism. All right, wrap us up because we got to get going. And also, let me wind you up real quick. If we talked about Doolittle in movies, if you want to create a legend and a myth, you go to Hollywood. And for some reason, I was thinking about this today. The idea that, speaking of Navy traitors and Navy Catholics, the fabrication of the rock and roll and drug and sex culture in the 60s by the son of the Navy admiral who was responsible for starting the Vietnam War with the Gulf of Tonkin false flag.
The Morrisons?
The Morrisons. So when you want to, you've got a completely fabricated event, either in the false flag of Tonkin Gulf or in the phenomenon of the Doors. And I got to tell you that one of the reasons why Jim Morrison is dead, he's alive, he's dead, he's alive. One of those reasons why he jumped in and out like that is because he himself was probably consumed with the guilt of being a fraud, realizing that he had some nominal talent. He was a nobody, couldn't even play an instrument, came out of nowhere. And then suddenly he's this rock and roll phenomenon. And I'm convinced that it eventually just overwhelmed him of being a fraud and realizing that the hype came from the CIA. Yeah, Laurel Cannon, Thomas.
Oh, okay, so, and of course, well...
And eventually, George, to bolster the myth, you make a movie about him with Val Kilmer.
Yes, Roger Stone, Oliver Stone. Now, and of course,
a guy who taught Catholic school in Vietnam before going back to Vietnam to kill Vietnamese.
Okay, well, anyhow, I've said this before on the show over a year ago, maybe almost 2 years ago. Of course, one of the other members of the Doors was Raymond Daniel Manzarek, Chicago Roman Catholic, went to DePaul University and St. Regis High School. Manzarek lived from 1939 to 2013. Now, in the early 1960s, he was in the U.S. Army, and he was involved with Army intelligence. And specifically, he was stationed in Laos at the time. Now, I did not know they had troops in Laos in the early 1960s until I read about Manzarek. So, Manzarek did his stint in the Army, got out in the mid-1960s, and then he moved to L.A., and he formed this band with his buddy Jim Morrison and a couple other members. Robbie Krieger and John Dinsmore. So they were just basically thrown together almost overnight, and they became an international phenomena. They're, in terms of popularity, they're in the same league as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the other bands of the day. And it's helpful. So James Douglas Morrison, Jim Morrison, had two things going for him. His father, Steve Morrison, the Rear Admiral at the Gulf and Tonkin, and his friendship with Manzarek.
Yeah, you say his name is the Admiral's first name is George? Also?
Well, George Stephen Morrison, but he went by Steve. As a matter of fact, after he retired from the Navy in the 1970s, he owned a bar until his time of his death in 2008. It was called Steve's Place.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we've got connections of him being Roman Catholic, and I've got at least one citation on Morrison during some drug-induced stupor stumbling into a Catholic church for direction.
Yeah, well, he died in Jim Morrison died in Paris.
Yeah, if he did.
Well, okay, well, I mean, are you saying he died like Hitler died in the bunker back in 45?
Sure. Yeah, there's certainly controversy surrounding his actual death.
Okay, so, and of course, if you look in the background of almost all these figures, these rock stars, particularly in the 1960s, Frank Zappa's wife, her name, but she went to the Loyola Institute in London.
Yeah, and this is where poor Dave McGowan completely dropped the ball, probably on purpose, and it didn't help him any. He completely avoided the Roman connections. He did great work on Laurel Canyon and the connections to the military and the CIA and to intelligence on the 60s and rock and roll. He completely avoided all this, and he died that weird early death of cancer, so it didn't help him any.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I think a powerful music connection to Rome at this time is the example of the Beatles. I guess these are more British bands, Beatles and U2, both of the unofficial fifth members of those bands. The Beatles and U2, you could say, are some of the most powerful, like pop culture, bands, of that time. People still play their, music to this day. But it was Sir George Martin for the Beatles, educated by Jesuits at St. Ignatius College, was the fifth member of the Beatles, their manager. And what was the McGuinness with the U2? Paul McGuinness, the unofficial fifth member of U2, went to Jesuit Clonglows Woods College in Ireland. I think that example just, perfectly shows, they're, it's them behind the scenes that are controlling it. And, this goes back with Hollywood, like a Jesuit priest, Daniel Aloysius Lord, S.J., a fourth vow ordained Jesuit priest, actually drafted the official Hollywood motion picture code.
Yeah, Eric, this is the stuff that no one else will touch. We're gonna close up soon. But this is the stuff that all the other hosts are absolute frauds, as they never touch this. This is the reason why we exist. Who is at the top? Who is doing the real enslaving? Who is committing the most heinous crimes? You don't even have to look into the conspiracy aspect to see the priests and the bishops and the cardinals raping children and getting away with it because they have connections. They have some sort of secret power in government that allows them to get away with it, and they perpetuate it. They help each other do it again and again and more and more.
Well, Johnny, what was the guy from the Keepers? While you said that, this is a perfect correlation to what you just said. Was it Father Joseph Maskell? The guy?
Yeah. Maskell in Baltimore.
Yeah, so while that scandal was going on there at the Archbishop Keogh High School, he was the chaplain to the Baltimore City Police, the county police, and the National Guard. He was a chaplain.
I think it was Air National Guard.
And he had a police scanner that he would take with him, and he would go on ride-alongs with the police, and go out and harass.
And he had a brother who was a cop and who was involved in the pedophilia. Maskell had a brother who was a cop who was also a pedophile, helped him rape children.
So that just epitomizes, how entrenched their control is into this current, social system.
Excuse me, can I just mention one other thing? I know the stream is just about over. I was just looking at Sir George Martin, the producer or the engineer for the Beatles. He went on to work with other bands. Paul McCartney Wings, Badfinger, and a few other groups. Well, during World War II, Martin was in the Royal Navy, and he was involved with naval intelligence. So he went to two different Jesuitical schools, St. Joseph's Academy and to Ignatius College. So there again, just like I mentioned Ray Manzarek, the keyboardist for the Doors, he was involved with Army intelligence. And Martin was involved with the Royal Office of Naval Intelligence.
Yeah, it's very suspicious, George. Anybody that can see that has to be asking questions. And like I said, McGowan started it and stopped dead short of the really, really important issue. Who is at the top? Because if you go after the middleman, the system still exists. The slavery still goes on. The manipulation still goes on. The crimes still go on. And that's why what we do is so unique. Guys, great job today. I got to get going. I got stuff I got to do.
Johnny, can you spare like one second? Not to belabor the point, I mentioned Sir George Martin, but this is a whole different show. How many people were involved with intelligence in some capacity who later went on to prominence? Sir Christopher Lee, the actor, he was Office of Royal Naval, or he was a Royal Air Force, but he's involved with MI6. Henry Fonda, the actor, he was Office of Naval, U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence and U.S. Navy. Malcolm Muggeridge, the reporter, the one who basically created the whole myth of Mother Teresa.
Hyper devout Roman Catholic convert, I think, right? Yeah, and George, let me tell you real quick why that's important. As I've said this before, and I noted it in Eaters of Children. The reason why that's so critical is you rely on intelligence to tell you who your enemies are. And if intelligence is controlled, corrupted, and filled with traitors, intelligence can point you at people that aren't enemies just so that you will fight who they want you to fight.
Well, and of course, they being involved with intelligence, you obviously know about psychological operations, psyops. You become proficient at manipulating people's emotions and either getting them to like something or to hate something, or to love somebody or to hate somebody, depending upon what you need to get done. So, talking about Sir George Martin, the producer or the engineer of the Beatles, he knew in addition to knowing about music, about sound, about pitch, volume, all that sort of stuff, mixing things, he knew how to manipulate people's emotions. Right. He knew how to make people happy, sad, angry, whatever, rebellious. Now, if you look at the history of the Beatles, particularly when they came to the United States, for about the first year or two, they're fairly innocuous. They essentially had bubblegum songs like She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Love Me Do, those sort of things. Basically, throwaway tunes. But within a year or two, they started turning darker, more serious. They started getting into the Eastern religion and the drugs and all that sort of stuff. So I'd imagine they did that. They, specifically George Martin and whoever his Svengali was, did that on purpose.
Right.
They had to do forgive the cliche, the boiling frog. Oh, aren't the Beatles cute with their relatively long hair and their nice little songs? How bad could they possibly be? Then, once you got people used to them, once you got the kids addicted to them and to other British bands like the Rolling Stones, like the Kinks, and so forth, then that's when you can lower the boom on them. You can introduce the Eastern religion. You can introduce the drugs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you one more intelligence connection that I covered in Eaters of Children. Sir Peter Telford Heyman, who people don't even know was in charge of MI6 through Baghdad and through Malta, also a pedophile, a member of the Pedophile Information Exchange, I think it's called, PI. His pedophile flat was discovered by law enforcement. He had pedophile materials in it, and when they realized it was him, they just pretended it never happened.
Are you talking about Jimmy Savile or?
No, George. Actually, it sounds a lot like Savile. No, Sir Peter Telford Heyman, who was the in charge of MI6. I cover it Eaters of Children.
Oh, and you're not talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah, it sounds similar to him too, but no, different pedophile who, and unfortunately for Epstein, he didn't get the Savile treatment, which is to die a natural death, being all palsy, being a hyper devout Roman Catholic like Savile was. He was an expendable Jew. So
did you guys see the Epstein? I guess I don't know. The Jesuits are probably frustrated with this because there was a medical doctor. The chief New York medical examiner immediately refuted this, but a doctor went on Fox News and said that it looked like Epstein was murdered, not it wasn't a suicide. He actually showed like a medical report where Epstein had 3 fractured bones in his neck. And this guy had said he posited that someone choked Epstein out. But, which is intriguing. But, great point. The fact that he was able to die in federal prison, has something to do with the fact that he was a Jew, not a papal knight. And the fact that there were many, many powerful Vatican knights connected to Jeffrey Epstein, like Rupert Murdoch, for instance, like Conrad Black, Gustavo Cisneros, Marie Habsburg, Prince Pierre d'Arenberg. For instance, you can see a photo of Epstein with the Pope, and you can see a photo of Epstein with the Jesuit Fidel Castro.
They would never have thrown Jimmy Savile to the wolves the way they threw Epstein. As a matter of fact, he's still a papal knight, and they absolutely refuse to take him off the rolls. That's how much they love him, the Catholic Church.
You can see a photo of the same Pope that was with Epstein. You can see a photo of him with Savile, where John Paul II is actually like comforting him. He's putting his shoulder around it. It's like his hands around his neck, so it's like a comforting kind of greeting.
Pope St. John Paul.
So
man, I got to get going. We got stuff to do over here. So great show. Let's do this again real soon.
We'll do. And of course, we'll have to talk about the fire situation in California. But
I'm glad you're safe, George. Yeah, we will. We'll talk about it.
Okay. We'll take care. We'll talk soon.
God bless.
Take care, Johnny. All the best.
Well, Eric, I have to go also. So have a good afternoon.
Yeah, have a good afternoon, you too, George. And just to wrap it up with intelligence agents, I'll just add the name William Peter Blatty. He was an intelligence agent and trained by Jesuits at Brooklyn Prep in Georgetown, and he wrote the Exorcist book. He was a psychological warfare, I think, at the U.S. Information Agency.
Okay, so that's all right. How about if we go into that in the next show?
Because we can go into that. And actually, another one, Pat O'Brien and Spencer Tracy, the devout Catholic Jesuit-trained actors, were both in the Naval Intelligence together before they went to Marquette Prep.
Okay.
It ties in perfectly because Pat O'Brien played Father Francis Duffy in the Fighting 69th, and now there's a statue of Duffy at Times Square, and he's known as like the Catholic war hero of World War I.
Well, and of course, Pat O'Brien played Newt Rockne in Newt Rockne All-American.
Yeah, he had many prominent roles. He was one of the most prominent. Like he was like the A-lister of that time.
Well, yes, and of course, we'll have to talk about this on our next show. And I mean, we can go on for hours. And of course, Newt Rockne All-American served as a launching pad for Ronald Reagan. Yes, he was only a B-list actor, but they were grooming him back then in 1940, 40 years before he became president, to be president. They were getting his name out there.
Oh, absolutely. People haven't seen it. I found a video from the Reagan Presidential Library. He gave it shows how much of a puppet he is. He actually gave a message to the Knights of Columbus via satellite. Mm-hmm. He actually makes a joke. Maybe I'll play it on the next stream we did. He actually makes a joke about Protestants having less rights in the city of New York. I won't spoil it if people haven't seen it, but he actually makes kind of like an inquisitorial joke about Protestants. But this is when satellite, was just being introduced, and he literally cables the Knights of Columbus via satellite. And then the next day, he spoke to High Knights of Columbus in the White House. I have footage of that.
Okay, so yes, it sounds as if you have plenty of material, and this is another show in and of itself.
Yeah, well, definitely. Yeah, and I'll keep in touch, George. Just keep sending information that we collect. We'll just keep no rush on I'm pretty flexible the next couple weeks, but whenever you're free to do a show, just let me know and we'll set one up.
Well, since we didn't do one last week, maybe we could do one later in the week, but we'll have to touch bases. And I do have to be going, and I'll keep in touch.
Yeah, likewise, George. All the best. Take care. Yeah, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah.
And we'll see you all in the next one.